Decision making in the age of big data, perils and pitfalls. There are three principal reasons why we gravitate to suboptimal decisions and why we worry over the decisions we make.
1. We are in an age of big data with uncertainties in an ever-changing environment. 2. We humans are irrational beings with inherent biases that impact our decisions. And 3. We are victims of decision manipulation and contamination. I will now elaborate on these, and hopefully you will be inspired to learn how to make better defensible decisions. Okay, first let's talk about decision making in the age of big data. Think of companies such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta, etc. These are some of the richest companies in the world. But what is the common factor that makes them industry giants? Data, data, data. They all make their money with data. In fact, data is the new currency. So it is no surprise that we are being bombarded with data. Let's go back 50 years. Imagine you're a 20-year-old young man in a small town. How would you go about finding your soulmate? Maybe from your neighborhood, your church, college, workplace, the local gym, or a place that you frequent. The selection pool is likely to be small, maybe half a dozen potential candidates. But today, young folks go on to an internet dating site and enter their requirements. The program would then scan thousands of potential candidates worldwide and might present around 20 suitable candidates. While it's great to have a large selection, deciding on the best candidate from so many just became a nightmare. Sadly, most folks are still not convinced. So let me present another simple example. Let's go back to the times before Google and the internet, and your grandpa is planning on buying a camera. Remember, these are times before the internet, so he looks at some magazines with glossy pictures, chats with friends who have cameras, and visits a local camera shop that might have 5 or 10 cameras and buys one. But today, he would Google and he would be faced with information overload, big data, hundreds of reviews of cameras. Then he goes to a camera shop, and what does he see? Choice overload, big data. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the internet, it is now possible to be extremely well informed and yet make suboptimal decisions at the same time. In these two examples, we demonstrated that you would be struggling to make the optimum decision in the age of big data. Yet, some of us would say, no worries, I can make the optimum decision. Here, even AI cannot help us because AI is not capable of incorporating our feelings into the decision-making process. While data is growing exponentially, how we use this data has not changed. We still rely on common sense, intuition, logic, experience, judgment, etc. Ideally, our common sense, logic, etc. need to be reinforced with analytical techniques. Number 2, let's talk about human irrationalities and inherent biases. If you have a brain, you have biases. All decisions are subjective and are driven by biases and personal interests. There are many well-known biases. I don't have time to go through every one of them, but I caution you to be aware of these.
Almost without an exception, we like to think that we make rational decisions. However, highly reputable organizations have studied human behavior and its impact on decision making. Their conclusion is that we really don't know our preferences that well, and this leads to suboptimal decisions. The bread machine. Williams-Sonoma is a high-end kitchen equipment retailer, and they conducted this experiment with a bread machine. When an $85 bread machine was introduced, it did not sell well. Rather than remove the product from the shelves, they introduced a $135 bread machine and placed it right next to the cheaper one. Guess what? Sales of the cheaper machine increased dramatically. Conclusion. People felt they were getting a bargain. Now they were focused on which one, not whether they even needed a bread machine. What about the conflict between heart and mind, the interplay in consumer decision making? This is a study done at the Washington State University and Iowa State University. A group of students were asked to remember a 2-digit number. A second group was asked to remember a 7-digit number. Then they were offered a choice of a plate of chocolate cake or a bowl of fruit salad. Amazingly, a statistically significant number of those who had to remember the 7-digit number chose chocolate cake. Later they admitted that they should have opted for the more healthier fruit salad. Conclusion. Under stressful conditions, we tend to settle for a more comforting or soothing decision rather than an optimal one. New York plastic surgeon Derek Antel looked at the jawlines of Fortune 500 company CEOs. Here we see Carly Fiorina and Steve Ballmer. He found that about 90% of the top CEOs had a prominent chin. You might ask, so what? Well, only 40% of the general population has a protruding chin. Conclusion. When it comes to decision making, perception still reigns. Somehow we have a notion that those with prominent chins would make good CEOs. Sounds funny. Business Week magazine published this article. Students were wired up and put through an MRI machine. They were asked to taste samples of wine with the price tag displayed. Unbeknown to them, the same wine was presented with two different price tags, a $5 actual price and a fictional price of $7.99. Guess what? All of them preferred the more expensive wine. Dr. Sheena Iyengar conducted a jam test at a supermarket. In this test of buying habits, varieties of jam were placed on a table. On some days 6 varieties were placed, and on other days 24 varieties were placed. Crowds were excited irrespective of how many were presented. However, the sales figures told a different story. When 6 were presented, 30% of customers purchased jam. However, when 24 were presented, only 3% purchased. Conclusion. People, confused by too many choices, opted not to make a decision. Behavioral scientists present the following conclusions. Our decisions are influenced by preconceived notions. If there are no options, people tend to procrastinate and avoid making a decision. If there are too many options, people are confused, hence reluctant to make a decision. With a few options, people are more likely to make a decision, but they are focused on which is the better option, even if a decision is not warranted. Perceptions and herd mentality drive our decisions. Under stress, we tend to settle for a more comforting or soothing decision than an optimal one. Question. How many of you agree that your decisions could be affected by these types of human tendencies? Behavioral scientists tell us where, how, and why we go wrong, but they don't really tell us how we can minimize the impact of such failings. This is our role. We help people make better, defensible decisions.
Again, I will make a bold statement that all decisions are feelings driven. Some of you might disagree, but I will justify this statement with conclusive arguments. Imagine 10 friends contributing $1 a week and buying lottery tickets. Lo and behold, one day they win a jackpot of $10 million. They share the prize with each receiving $1 million. Now they all visit a financial planner who offers them two potential investments. A fixed deposit of 3% and an annuity yielding 8% with a small chance of losing some of the capital.
He then asked them what percentage of the winnings each person would place in the fixed deposit. Question. Would all of them say 50-50? Of course not. Then would it be fair to say that each person would invest a different amount in the fixed deposit? Almost certain.
What I just showed you is, given the same data, different people would make different decisions. This is what I refer to as data-supported, feelings-driven decision-making. Let me relate a real-life event somewhat embarrassing to the US government. You may have heard of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is where the US dropped the first atom bomb in August of 1945. Initially, the Defense Department identified Hiroshima and Kyoto as the target cities. However, Secretary of War Henry Stimson objected to Kyoto being bombed. But why? When Stimson was the governor of the Philippines, he spent his honeymoon in Kyoto, and he had fond memories of this culturally rich city. Of course, unable to convince the Pentagon, Stimson persuaded President Truman to replace Kyoto with Nagasaki. Hence, today we have Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As you can see, personal biases can influence even US national defense-related decisions. One other example with scientific evidence to support this idea. At Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, an experiment was carried out with mice. Mice were made to smell wintergreen, which is a herb with a distinct smell. While they were smelling the herb, mice were subject to a mild electric shock. Guess what happened? The next 7 generations of mice were scared when they were placed close to wintergreen. Yes, sir. The scientists concluded that our experiences are not in our body nor in our mind. It is being passed through our DNA or some type of consciousness. Hence our irrational behaviors. Let's face it, you won't accept that I pick a soulmate for you, right? You want to pick your own that you're comfortable with, even if your biases would contaminate your decision. While we do realize that our decisions might be contaminated by our biases, we do want our preferences to be reflected in our decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, beware. Bias carries a negative connotation, while we accept preferences as an essential part of who we are. In conclusion, we are indeed irrational human beings with personal biases that drive our decisions. While it's true that we can never totally eliminate the influence of biases on our decisions, we can certainly manage them to minimize their negative impact on our decision. Okay, finally, let me address decision manipulation and contamination. Getting us to spend our dollars is big business. There is a plethora of techniques that marketers use to manipulate our thought process. In the interest of time, I will discuss just a couple. Ghost options. Vendors place the ghost option to direct consumers' attention to another item on offer. Let's watch a short video of a study conducted by world-renowned behavioral scientist Dan Ariely.
2 examples of this principle. This was an ad from The Economist a few years ago that gave us 3 choices. An online subscription for $59, a print subscription for $125, or you could get both for $125. I took this and I gave it to 100 MIT students. I said, what would you choose? And these are the market share. Most people wanted the combo deal. Thankfully, nobody wanted the dominated option. But now, if you have an option that nobody wants, you take it off. Right? So I printed another version of this when I eliminated the middle option, and I gave it to another 100 students. Here's what happens. Now the most popular option became the least popular, and the least popular became the most popular. What was happening is that option that was useless in the middle was useless in the sense that nobody wanted it, but it wasn't useless in the sense that it helped people figure out what they wanted. In fact, relative to the option in the middle, which was only the print for 125, the print and web for 125 looked like a fantastic deal. And as a consequence, people chose it. The general idea here, by the way, is that we actually don't know our preferences that well. And because we don't know our preferences that well, we're susceptible to all of these influences from the external forces.
Banks, supermarkets, restaurants, phone companies, they all use the ghost option frequently. In fact, you may have noticed that McDonald's offers fries in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. The medium is presented and priced with the sole intention of driving the consumers to purchase the larger fries. The next I want to talk to you about priming. Priming involves exposing someone to a stimulus that influences their subsequent thoughts, behaviors, or decisions without them being consciously aware of it. This can shape their responses and create a bias towards a particular way of thinking or acting.
Let's talk about behavioral economics.
Dr. Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize for his work in the area of behavioral economics.
This match concerns nice bottle of champagne I have here. These people think they're about to use slow, sensible system 2 to make a rational decision about how much they would pay for a bottle of champagne. And with the help of a bag of ping pong balls, we can influence that decision. I've got a set of number balls here from 1 to 100 in this bag. I'd like to reach in and draw one out at random for me, if you would. First, they've got to choose a ball. Number says 10. 10. 10. 10. They think it's a random number, but in fact it's rigged. All the balls are marked with the low number 10.
What we do is purposefully we give people a first decision that is clearly meaningless.
10. 10. Okay. Would you be willing to pay £10 for this nice bottle of vintage champagne?
I would, yes. Yeah, I guess.
Okay. This first decision is meaningless, based as it is on a seemingly random number. But what it does do is lodge the low number 10 in their heads. Now for the real question, where we ask them how much they'd actually pay for the champagne. What's the maximum amount you think you'd be willing to pay?
20?
Okay. £7. £7. Okay. Probably £10. A range of fairly low offers. But what happens if we pry people with a much higher number, 65 instead of 10? What does that one say? 65, okay. It says 65. How will this affect the price people are prepared to pay? What's the maximum you would be willing to pay for a bottle of champagne? 40?
45 pounds.
45, okay. 50. 40 quid, okay. 50 pounds, 50 pounds?
Yeah, I'd pay between 50 and 80 pounds.
Between 50 and 80?
Yeah.
Logic has gone out the window. The price people are prepared to pay is influenced by nothing more than a number written on a ping pong ball.
What happened to your logic? Huh? Those who picked the number 65 were willing to pay a high price, while those who picked the number 10 were not willing to pay a high price. They were being primed and manipulated, and they did not even know it.
All right, time to wrap up. Hopefully, you gained some new insights from this session on decision making. But before we wrap up, let me draw your attention to one more complication that we face when making decisions. That is decision making in uncertain environments. The best way to explain this is with a study we conducted for a client.
Single criterion decisions with multiple uncertainties using decision trees and D-zone maps. GenGen Pharmaceuticals is developing a new drug for the treatment of diabetes, thrombosis, and cholesterol. However, GenGen can invest only in one of these projects. The cost of pursuing these products for the preliminary test, they have to spend $2.5 million, and for FDA approval, that would cost $500,000. The marketing department has arrived at potential revenues from these projects. Here too there are some uncertainties. There is a potential for high revenue or low revenue. For example, for cholesterol, the high revenue would be $13 million, while the low would be $7 million. Uncertainties facing GenGen are: will the preliminary test be successful? Will the FDA approve the new drug? Will sales generate the projected revenues? The question for GenGen is, which project?
As you saw, common sense is not going to be very helpful here. Additionally, you will have a hard time defending your common sense decision. Our D-zone mapping software is the answer. Let's take a look at an interesting fact at two very different companies. Dean Foods is the largest milk producer in the USA since 1922. And WeWork was a startup with a valuation of $47 billion. Now, why do I present these two? Because they both filed for bankruptcy in 2019. And that was before COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you are a mere startup or an industry giant, no company is safe. Remember what Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there. In 2018, Jeff Bezos told the employees, Amazon is not too big to fail. He said Amazon will ultimately fail. What a courageous statement, what a realist. So let me recap. Is it not true that our lives revolve around knowing what we want, which is making a decision, and getting what we want, which is negotiating? Yes.
Is it not true that at some point in our lives, we will have to make decisions pertaining to careers, education, buying a home or a car, investments, retirement, etc.? I'm sure you'll agree. Is it not true that in life we don't often get what we deserve? We get what we negotiate. The evidence was irrefutable. In today's age of big data, we need to reinforce our common sense, gut feel, logic, intuition, etc. with analytical techniques. We are indeed irrational human beings with biases that negatively impact our decisions. And 3, we are victims of intentional decision contamination and manipulation. So what next? Just say, oh, insightful presentation. I was inspired. Very useful information, etc. And then go back to making the same decisions, right? With common sense, logic, intuition, etc. Knowing fully well that your feelings would contaminate your decisions.
Caution. While leadership is top-down, decision-making is in fact bottom-up. Why? Because to make decisions, leaders at every level have to rely on their subordinates to provide curated, reliable information. So the subordinates too need to be trained to make better defensible decisions. Hence the justification for company-wide training.
Honestly, it's time that you learn how to remedy this situation. Otherwise, you will continue to lose money and miss opportunities with suboptimal decisions and poor negotiating. Take our on-demand course at learn.expertus.com. Hang on, now we have an irresistible offer for you. Take the free 4-minute self-assessment and receive a $30 gift certificate, which you can use when purchasing our courses. Additionally, we have a limited time offer. Buy the decision-making course and get the negotiating course free. And finally, all courses include our decision-making software, a $200 value. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Take a minute to connect with me on LinkedIn.